Hello, friends, and welcome back to Bedtime History. Before we begin tonight's story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and share this episode with someone who loves history as much as you do. Where are you listening from tonight? Maybe you're cozy under the blankets after a long day. Maybe you're on a late-night walk, or maybe it's early morning where you are. Whatever the time, wherever you are in the world, this story is just for you. Tonight, we'll travel back more than 2,000 years to a land of sand and river, temples and marble palaces, a land where one woman would rise above all others, her brilliance and courage echoing across time. Her name was Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt. So get comfortable, close your eyes if you like, and let's begin our journey. The sea rests under a silver moon. Waves touch the marble docks of Alexandria. Lanterns flicker along the water. Golden light dances on the rippling tide. Ships rise and fall in the current. Roman galleys with sharp bronze prows. Grain ships swollen with the harvest of the Nile. Traders from Arabia carrying incense and spices. Greek triremes, their sails painted with bright colors. The harbor is alive with sound, the creak of wood, the splash of oars, the calls of sailors unloading goods from distant lands, the murmur of merchants haggling in many tongues. The air itself is thick with scents, salt from the sea, cinnamon from Arabia, wine from Greece, myrrh and frankincense from the east, all mingling into one perfume, a perfume that belongs only to Alexandria. This is not an ordinary city. This is Egypt's crown jewel, a beacon to the ancient world. The Pharaoh's lighthouse towers above the waves. Its fire burns brightly, casting its glow across the horizon, guiding weary sailors safely home. And within the city, the great library stands tall, a temple of wisdom. Within its walls are hundreds of thousands of scrolls, medicine, mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, poetry and myth, knowledge gathered from Egypt, Greece, Persia, India, and beyond. Scholars walk its marble halls. They debate in whispers. They copy manuscripts by lamplight. They dream of solving the mysteries of the world. But Alexandria is more than brilliance. It is also fragile. The Ptolemaic dynasty still rules, descendants of Alexander's general Ptolemy. But their power is cracking. The royal court is filled with rivalries. Brothers and sisters fight for the throne, each one desperate to be pharaoh, each one willing to betray the other. And far to the west, Rome is watching. Its legions have conquered Greece. Its generals have crushed rivals across the Mediterranean. Egypt is rich. Egypt is fertile. And Rome hungers for it. High above the bustling harbor, the palace gleams. Columns of white marble rise into the night. Torches burn along the terraces. On the highest balcony, a woman steps into the moonlight. She wears linen woven with threads of gold. Her dark hair is braided like the goddess Isis. She is young, yet her gaze is sharp. Her name is Cleopatra, Cleopatra VII. She looks out at the sea. Her eyes reflect the stars, eyes that will one day captivate the world. But Cleopatra is not only a queen of beauty.
She is a scholar. She is fluent in 9 tongues. She studies philosophy and politics. She knows the medicines of Egypt. She debates with scholars in the library itself. She is the first of her dynasty to speak Egyptian. She honors the gods of the Nile. She stands before her people not only as queen, but as Pharaoh, the living goddess Isis reborn. But tonight questions weigh upon her. Can she protect her kingdom? Can she keep Egypt free? Or will Rome's eagle stretch its wings over the Nile? The palace is quiet. Only the soft sound of waves below. Only the distant cries of sailors in the harbor. Cleopatra rests her hand upon the marble railing. The stone feels cold, but the fire in her heart is fierce. She knows one truth. Power is not only in swords, it lives in symbols. It lives in stories. If she can weave myth with reality, if she can become Isis to her people, then perhaps Egypt will endure. The moonlight falls upon her face. She is woman and goddess, queen and myth, mortal and eternal. Behind her, the palace glows. Before her, the sea stretches into shadow. And beyond that sea lies Rome, waiting, watching, hungering. Cleopatra takes a deep breath. Her reign has only begun. Her challenges lie ahead. But already she feels the weight of destiny. She is Pharaoh. She is legend. She is the last queen of Egypt. And tonight, beneath the stars of Alexandria, her story begins.
The story of Cleopatra cannot be told without her family. A dynasty of kings and queens. A dynasty born from conquest and shaped by ambition. 3 centuries before Cleopatra, a young warrior marched across the known world. His name was Alexander of Macedon. The world remembers him as Alexander the Great. Alexander crushed empires. He conquered Persia. He marched into Egypt, and there he was welcomed as a liberator. The priests of Egypt placed the double crown upon his head. They declared him Pharaoh. They called him the son of the god Amun. But Alexander's empire did not last. At the age of 32, he died suddenly in Babylon. His generals divided his vast empire, each one seizing land for himself. One general, Ptolemy, claimed Egypt. He had been close to Alexander, some say even his childhood friend. Ptolemy brought Alexander's body to Egypt. He placed it in a golden sarcophagus. He entombed him in the city that bore his name, Alexandria. By doing so, Ptolemy bound himself to Alexander's memory, and from that day forward he ruled Egypt. Thus began the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek family ruling an ancient land. For nearly 300 years, they wore the crowns of the pharaohs. They built temples to Egyptian gods, but in their palaces, they spoke Greek, not Egyptian. The Ptolemies kept power through wealth, through spectacle, and through ruthless control. They married brothers to sisters, fathers to daughters, so that their blood remained pure. But these marriages bred jealousy, they bred betrayal,
and often blood was spilled inside the palace walls. To the Egyptian people, the Ptolemies seemed both foreign and familiar. Foreign because they came from Greece. Familiar because they worshipped Isis, Osiris, and Horus. The dynasty balanced on this thin line, Greek in blood, Egyptian in soul. By the time of Cleopatra, many rulers had come and gone, some strong, many weak. Kings poisoned by their siblings, queens murdered by their sons. Civil wars raged not only against outsiders, but within the royal family itself. Cleopatra's father was Ptolemy XII. He was called Ulatus, the flute player. He loved music. He loved luxury. But he was weak. He owed debts to Rome. He even fled Egypt for a time when his throne was challenged. When Ptolemy XII returned with Roman support, he punished his enemies harshly. But the truth was clear. Egypt was no longer fully independent. Rome had become the great power behind the throne, and Egypt's rulers were often its clients. Into this world, Cleopatra was born, a princess of both Greece and Egypt, a child of wealth and intrigue. From the moment of her birth, her life was tied to politics. Her destiny was bound to both the Nile and Rome. The royal court of the Ptolemies. Imagine the palace in Alexandria. White marble halls, walls painted with gold and blue, statues of Greek gods alongside statues of Egyptian deities, banquets filled with roasted meats, sweet honey cakes, and wine imported from the islands of the Aegean. But beneath the glitter lay danger. At court, nothing was simple. Every smile hid suspicion. Every alliance could end in betrayal. The Ptolemies ruled as pharaohs, but their greatest enemies were often their own kin. Brothers fought sisters, mothers plotted against sons, rulers were crowned in the morning and dead by poison in the evening. This was the family into which Cleopatra was born. To survive in such a court required more than beauty. It required intelligence. It required courage. It required a mind sharp as a blade. And Cleopatra, even as a girl, was known for her sharp mind. She listened carefully. She studied the mistakes of her ancestors. She knew that to endure, she must be cleverer than them all. Egypt at a crossroads. While the dynasty fought within, the world beyond Egypt shifted. Rome was rising. Its armies marched across lands once ruled by Alexander. Its generals grew rich from conquest. Its senators plotted and schemed in the Forum. To Rome, Egypt was irresistible. Its fertile Nile Valley fed millions. Its grain was the lifeblood of empires. Its gold, papyrus, and linen filled Roman markets. Whoever ruled Egypt held a treasure beyond measure. But Rome did not invade, yet. Instead, it crept closer through politics, through debts, through alliances, through marriages and promises. Egypt's rulers became Rome's clients, and Rome, patient as a serpent, waited for the right moment. Cleopatra grew up in this shifting world. She learned languages so she could speak with diplomats. She studied history so she could see the patterns of power. She trained herself to debate, to persuade, to inspire. Unlike her father, she would not be weak. The legacy she carried. When Cleopatra looked back on her family's history, she saw greatness and ruin. She saw Alexander the Great, the conqueror who had founded her city. She saw Ptolemy I, the general who had built a dynasty from nothing. But she also saw weakness, debt, betrayal, and Rome's shadow looming ever larger. She understood her place. She was heir to a throne cracked with fractures. She was daughter of a dynasty respected and despised. She was both Greek and Egyptian. And she knew if Egypt were to survive, she must become more than a queen. She must become Pharaoh in truth. Cleopatra was still young, but already the fire of destiny burned in her. Already she studied not just scrolls and stories, but the hearts of men. She would need every ounce of wit and courage, because her family's history taught her one lesson. In the house of the Ptolemies, only the strong endured. And in the world beyond, Rome was waiting.
Cleopatra was born in the Palace of Alexandria. The year was 69 BCE. The air of the palace was filled with incense, the soft hum of music, and the ever-present murmur of politics. She was not the only child of her father, Ptolemy XII. She had brothers. She had sisters. Each of them would one day become her rival. But from the start, Cleopatra stood apart. Even as a child, her gaze was sharp. Her voice was steady. She listened more than she spoke. She asked questions that startled her tutors. While other children of the court were pampered, Cleopatra wanted to learn. She wanted to understand the world. The palace was her school. Her tutors were the finest scholars of Alexandria, philosophers from Athens, mathematicians from the library, priests who carried the old wisdom of Egypt. Cleopatra studied language first: Greek, the tongue of her dynasty; Egyptian, the language of her people; Hebrew, Aramaic, Latin. She would eventually master 9 tongues. No other pharaoh before her had spoken so many. With each language, she gained the power to persuade, to speak with diplomats without interpreters, to hear secrets no one thought she would understand. Her tutors taught her philosophy. She read Plato and Aristotle. She debated the nature of justice and the soul. She studied mathematics. She learned astronomy, the movements of the stars. She learned medicine, the mixing of herbs and ointments. She learned rhetoric, the art of speaking with force and clarity. Every lesson sharpened her mind. Every scroll she read made her stronger. She understood that knowledge was power, and she would need all the power she could gather. The palace was beautiful, but it was also dangerous. Every corner held whispers. Every banquet hid daggers. Her father, Ptolemy XII, struggled to keep the throne. He lavished money on Roman allies. He sunk Egypt into debt. He lived in fear of losing his crown. Cleopatra saw this weakness. She saw how her father begged for Rome's approval, and she vowed she would not follow his path. Her siblings, too, were dangerous. They smiled at one another in the gardens,
but in their hearts they plotted. Each child of the dynasty dreamed of ruling. Each one believed the throne belonged to them. Cleopatra learned quickly to trust no one fully, to read every gesture, every glance, every whisper. Even as a girl, she practiced the arts of survival. Her childhood was not play, it was preparation. Cleopatra was curious about life outside the palace walls. She listened to servants tell stories of the Nile. She watched fishermen cast their nets. She studied the faces of farmers bringing grain into the city. Unlike her Greek ancestors, Cleopatra loved Egypt itself. She spoke the language of the people. She prayed to their gods. She honored Isis, Hathor, and Osiris. She learned how the Nile rose each year, flooding the land with fertile soil. She listened to the songs sung at the riverbanks. She knew that the lifeblood of Egypt was not gold, but water and harvest. This made her different. The people saw her not only as queen-to-be, but as one of their own. And in time, this bond would help her rule. Even in her youth, Cleopatra could not escape the shadow of Rome. Envoys arrived often at the palace. They demanded repayment of debts. They demanded loyalty. Cleopatra listened as her father bargained. She heard the names Pompey, Caesar, Crassus, names that would one day shape her destiny. She realized early that Egypt was not free, that every decision her family made was weighed against the will of Rome. And she began to dream, not only of surviving, but of standing equal to Rome itself. Cleopatra's education was not only in scrolls and lessons, it was in experience. When her father left the throne during times of unrest, she watched how the city trembled. When riots shook Alexandria, she saw the fear in people's eyes. She learned how fragile power could be, but she also learned how it could be restored through confidence, through vision, through the ability to inspire. By her teenaged years, Cleopatra had grown into a woman of striking presence, not only for her beauty, but for her voice, her wit, and her intelligence. Visitors to the palace wrote of her, not as the most beautiful of women, but as the most fascinating. Her charm was in her presence, her eyes, her words, her laughter. She could make others believe. She could make others follow. In the quiet of her chambers, Cleopatra would study the stars. She believed her fate was written among them. She prayed to Isis for guidance. She whispered her dreams to the river Nile. She already knew her life would not be ordinary. She was not meant to be silent. She was not meant to be hidden. She was meant to rule. The seeds of destiny were planted in her youth. Her education gave her wisdom. Her family gave her rivals. Her people gave her love. And Rome gave her an enemy. She would carry all of this forward into battles of power and survival, into love and betrayal, into choices that would echo across history. Cleopatra's childhood was over. Her training was complete. The girl of Alexandria had become a young woman, and soon the throne would call to her. But to take it, she would face the deadliest rivals of all, her own blood.
The palace of Alexandria glittered with gold. Its halls were filled with music, with feasts, with laughter. But beneath the beauty, danger lurked. The Ptolemaic dynasty was not a family of peace. It was a house built on rivalry, a throne surrounded by daggers. Cleopatra knew this from childhood, but when she grew older, the danger became sharper and more real. When Ptolemy XII died, the throne of Egypt passed to his children. His will declared that Cleopatra would rule, but not alone. She would share power with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. It was tradition, brother and sister, king and queen, pharaoh and co-ruler. But tradition did not mean harmony. From the start, Ptolemy XIII's advisors whispered. They told the boy king he should not share. They told Cleopatra was too strong, too clever, too dangerous. Cleopatra was about 18. Her brother was about 10. She had wisdom and presence. He had youth and powerful guardians. The court began to divide. Some stood with Cleopatra, others with Ptolemy XIII. The palace filled with plots. At banquets, voices lowered when Cleopatra entered. Servants carried messages in the night. Advisors exchanged knowing glances. Cleopatra could feel the tide turning. She saw how her brother's supporters grew bolder, how her own allies were pushed aside. She felt the walls of power closing in. The boy himself was not her enemy, but those who guided him were ruthless. They sought power for themselves, and to gain it, they needed Cleopatra gone. Soon the conflict boiled over. Cleopatra was forced from the palace. She fled into the desert, into the land of her ancestors. The Nile still flowed for her. The people still loved her. But in Alexandria, her throne was slipping away. Cleopatra raised her own army. She gathered support from the countryside. She prepared to fight for her crown. But she knew the struggle would be fierce. And as she planned, a greater power loomed closer: Rome. Rome was never far from Egypt's throne. Its generals watched every move. Its senators debated who should rule. To Rome, Egypt was treasure. Whoever ruled it was useful. Whoever opposed them was expendable. At this time, Rome itself was in turmoil. Civil war raged between Pompey the Great and Julius Caesar. The Mediterranean shook with battles. Armies marched. Allies betrayed one another. Cleopatra knew that to survive, she could not ignore Rome. She must choose her allies wisely. She must play the game of empires. Back in Alexandria, Cleopatra's siblings moved against her. Her younger sister, Arsinoe, was ambitious. She too dreamed of the crown. She whispered in the ears of Ptolemy's advisors. She fanned the flames of conflict. It was not only a fight for Egypt, it was a fight for survival. In the Ptolemaic house, siblings did not hesitate to betray one another. History had shown it many times before. Cleopatra understood this clearly. To return to the throne, she must be stronger than her rivals. She must outwit them, and she must be willing to risk everything. While her enemies schemed in the palace, Cleopatra traveled among the people. She dressed in the robes of Isis.
She spoke in Egyptian, not Greek. She blessed the farmers. She prayed with the priests. The people saw her as one of them, not a distant ruler, not a foreign queen, but a pharaoh in truth. They whispered her name with love. They prayed for her return. And when she promised she would reclaim her crown, they believed her. Meanwhile, Alexandria grew restless. Markets were tense. Merchants feared war. Sailors spread rumors. Would Cleopatra return with an army? Would Rome intervene? Would the boy king rule alone? The palace glittered still, but everyone knew the truth. The throne was not secure. Egypt's future hung by a thread. Cleopatra, still young, already understood the great truth of her dynasty. Power was never safe. Power must be seized and defended again and again. She sharpened her mind. She studied the moves of her enemies. She prepared for the moment to strike. And soon, that moment would come. For across the sea, a Roman general was sailing toward Egypt, a man whose name would soon be tied forever to hers, Julius Caesar. Cleopatra's exile would not be the end. It was only the beginning. The palace intrigues, the rivalries of blood, and the games of empires were about to collide. And at the center of it all stood a young queen, determined, brilliant, and ready to shape history.
The year was 48 BCE. Alexandria trembled with uncertainty. Cleopatra was in exile. Her brother, Ptolemy XIII, sat on the throne. But Rome had arrived. Far away, Rome had been torn apart. Two giants of the Republic had clashed, Pompey the Great and Julius Caesar. Pompey fled after his defeat. He sailed to Egypt, hoping for refuge. But instead of welcome, he was betrayed. On the shores of Egypt, Pompey was murdered, stabbed by men who sought to please Caesar. His head was cut off, presented as a gift to the Roman general. But Caesar did not rejoice. He wept at the sight of Pompey's severed head. Once they had been allies. Once they had been family through marriage. Now he had lost an enemy, but also a part of Rome itself. Caesar remained in Alexandria. He wanted order. He wanted Egypt secure. He wanted the debts owed by the Ptolemies repaid. And so the fate of Cleopatra and her brother lay in his hands. Cleopatra knew her chance had come. If she could win Caesar, she could win back her throne. But Alexandria was dangerous for her. Her brother's soldiers patrolled the streets. Her advisors sought to kill her. How could she reach Caesar safely? She devised a daring plan. She would enter the palace in secret. She would not walk through the gates. She would be carried in. With the help of a loyal servant, Cleopatra rolled herself into a carpet. Some say it was a sack of linen. Others say it was a rug. What matters is this: she hid herself within its folds. The servant carried the bundle into Caesar's quarters. He laid it before the Roman general. And when the cloth was unrolled, out stepped Cleopatra.
young, radiant, dressed as a queen, her eyes shining with confidence. Caesar was astonished. Here was a woman bold enough to risk everything. Here was a queen who would not hide, who would not beg, who would gamble her life for her throne. That night, Caesar and Cleopatra spoke. They spoke of Egypt, of Rome, of power, of destiny. Caesar was in his 50s, a man hardened by war, a general who had conquered Gaul, defeated Pompey, and risen to the peak of Roman power. Cleopatra was 21, a queen without a throne, but her voice was steady, her words were sharp, she matched his confidence with her own. What passed between them in that first meeting would change history. To Caesar, Cleopatra was not just a young queen. She was brilliant, she was ambitious, she was unafraid. To Cleopatra, Caesar was not just a Roman general. He was the key to survival, to power, to Egypt's future. Soon whispers filled the palace. Cleopatra had captured Caesar's attention. He chose to support her claim. Together, they would rule Egypt. But Ptolemy's advisors raged. They accused Cleopatra of seduction. They claimed Caesar was bewitched. They plotted to strike against them both. Alexandria erupted in conflict. Streets filled with soldiers, torches lit the night. The city burned with civil war. Caesar fought with his legion. Cleopatra rallied her supporters. Brother against sister, Roman steel against Egyptian intrigue. In the chaos, Cleopatra stood by Caesar's side, not only as a queen seeking aid, but as a partner in war. At last, Ptolemy XIII was defeated. The boy king fled into the Nile. His boat capsized. He drowned in the waters of Egypt. Cleopatra returned to the throne. She was once again Pharaoh of Egypt, but now she did not rule alone. She ruled with Caesar's support. To secure the dynasty, she married another brother, Ptolemy XIV. It was tradition, but everyone knew the truth. Her true ally was Caesar. The bond between Cleopatra and Caesar was not only political. It became personal. It became intimate. Cleopatra bore him a son. She named him Caesarion, meaning Little Caesar. To the Egyptians, he was heir to the pharaohs. To Cleopatra, he was also heir to Rome. Their union was a statement. Egypt would not bow. Egypt would stand beside Rome, not as subject, but as equal. Cleopatra's gamble had succeeded. She had risked everything to meet Caesar, and in doing so, she secured her throne. But her story with Caesar was not yet finished. Soon she would travel to Rome itself. Soon she would walk the streets of the eternal city, and there her presence would dazzle and disturb. For Cleopatra was no ordinary queen, and Rome was not ready for her. The night she stepped from that carpet changed the course of empires. A young queen had seized her chance. A Roman general had opened his heart, and together they had begun a story that would echo across the ages.
Cleopatra was pharaoh once more. But this time she was not alone. Beside her stood Julius Caesar, the most powerful man of Rome. Their alliance was more than survival. It was strategy, it was politics, and it was something deeper. Cleopatra was 21, young, brilliant, and already hardened by struggle. Caesar was in his 50s, experienced, seasoned by war. A man who had seen empires rise and fall. Yet, when they spoke, there was no gap of age. Their minds met as equals. Their ambitions aligned. Both wanted power. Both wanted legacy. Together they saw possibility. Egypt and Rome, side by side, linked through them. For Cleopatra, Caesar was more than a protector. He was a doorway. Through him, she could ensure Egypt's survival. Through him, she could shield her throne from rivals. For Caesar, Cleopatra was more than a queen. She was Egypt itself. She was wealth, grain, and treasure. But also, she was captivating. Her voice, her wit, her presence, all drew him in. It was not only her beauty, as Roman writers would later claim, it was her mind, her ability to persuade, her gift of making others believe. From their union came a child, a son. He was called Caesarion, Little Caesar. To Cleopatra, he was the bridge between Egypt and Rome. The blood of pharaohs and of Caesars, a symbol of a future where Egypt was not subject, but equal. She presented him to her people. She claimed him as heir, the child of Isis and Jupiter, born of goddess and god. The Egyptians rejoiced, but in Rome, the whispers began. Caesar already had a wife. Caesar already had a son. To bring a foreign queen into the heart of the Republic, to raise her child as his own, it was scandal. In 46 BCE, Cleopatra sailed to Rome. She came not as a guest, but as a queen. Her ship glided up the Tiber, its sails dyed purple, the color of royalty, its oars of silver flashing in the sunlight. Rome had never seen such spectacle. Crowds gathered on the riverbanks. They whispered her name. They stared at the queen who dared enter the city. Caesar welcomed her. He housed her in a villa near the Tiber. There Cleopatra lived openly with him. There she raised Caesarion. Statues of Cleopatra were erected in Rome. She was honored as Isis. She was worshipped by some and despised by many. For the Roman people, Cleopatra was both wonder and threat. Some admired her brilliance, some envied her wealth.
Many feared her influence. To them, she was not just a queen. She was a foreign ruler. A woman who dared to stand as equal to Caesar. And they whispered that she had bewitched him. Senators grew uneasy. How could Caesar, the champion of Rome, be drawn so close to a queen of the East? Would he make her his wife? Would he make her son heir to Rome? The questions spread like fire, and with them, suspicion. But Caesar did not waver. He invited her to banquets. He let her stand beside him in public. He treated her as a sovereign, not a concubine. Cleopatra, in turn, studied Rome. She walked its streets. She watched its markets. She listened to its politics. She measured its power. She understood that Rome was not just a city. It was an empire in waiting. And to protect Egypt, she must understand it. She must stand within its heart. Between Cleopatra and Caesar, there was affection. There was intimacy. But there was also calculation. Each saw in the other a reflection of ambition. Each saw in the other a tool, a partner, a risk. For Cleopatra, Caesar was the shield of Egypt. For Caesar, Cleopatra was the jewel of the Nile. But politics is never simple. And love, when tied to power, is fragile. Cleopatra's time in Rome was glorious, but it was also dangerous. Enemies surrounded Caesar. The Senate grew restless. Some whispered of tyranny. Some whispered of betrayal. And Cleopatra, living openly with him, was caught in that storm. Her presence was fuel for rumors. Her child was proof of Caesar's ambitions, and the Senate could not allow it. In 44 BCE, the whispers turned to daggers. Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March, struck down in the Senate house. Cleopatra fled Rome with her son. She returned to Egypt, her heart broken, her future uncertain. The man who had restored her throne was gone. The empire that had protected her was in chaos. And once more, Cleopatra stood alone. But her story was far from over. For another Roman general would soon rise, another man of ambition, another man who would meet her and fall under her spell.
Rome was restless. The Senate trembled. The people murmured. And then on the Ides of March, March 15th, 44 BCE, the storm broke. The assassination of Caesar. Julius Caesar walked into the Senate house. He wore his toga of purple. He carried himself with pride, but the air was thick with conspiracy. Around him, senators gathered, men who had once called him friend, men who had once fought at his side. And then the daggers struck. First one, then another,
sharp steel tearing through cloth and flesh. The hall filled with shouts. Caesar stumbled. He looked into the faces of those he trusted. He saw Brutus, a man he thought of as a son. And with his final breath, he fell at the base of Pompey's statue. The great general of Rome was dead. Cleopatra in Rome. News spread like fire. Rome was in chaos. Crowds roared in the Forum. The Senate shook with fear. And in the midst of it all was Cleopatra. She had lived openly with Caesar. She had borne him a son. She had walked through Rome as queen. Now the man who gave her power was gone, and the city turned dangerous. Whispers became accusations. Enemies eyed her with suspicion. Some said she had bewitched him. Others said she sought to make her son ruler of Rome. All agreed her presence was no longer safe. The flight from Rome. Cleopatra gathered her treasures. She gathered her servants. She gathered Caesarion, her child. Under the shadow of night, she left the city. Her ships waited at the Tiber. Their sails caught the wind, and they carried her back across the sea. Rome faded behind her. The eternal city, the city that had nearly been hers, was lost. Her heart was heavy. She had lost her protector. She had lost her lover. She had lost her place in the empire. But she was not broken. She still had her throne. She still had her son. And Egypt still needed her. Return to Alexandria. The harbor of Alexandria shimmered in the sunlight. Crowds gathered to see her return. They whispered of Caesar. They whispered of his death. They whispered of Cleopatra's fate. But she walked with dignity. She carried herself as Isis incarnate. She held Caesarion close. She showed the world that Egypt still had its queen. The people cheered. They laid flowers along her path. They prayed to the gods for her strength. In the palace, she reclaimed her throne. She ruled once more as Pharaoh, but this time without Caesar, this time without Rome's protection. A widow of power. Cleopatra mourned Caesar deeply. He had been her ally, her shield, her partner. Now he was gone, and she was left to face the world alone. But she did not collapse into despair. She turned her grief into resolve. She vowed that Caesarion, her son, would live to inherit her throne, and perhaps even his father's empire. She raised him in the palace. She taught him the ways of Egypt. She whispered to him of Rome. She told him that he carried 2 worlds in his blood. Rome after Caesar. But Egypt could not ignore Rome. Caesar's death had thrown the Republic into chaos. His assassins believed they had saved liberty, but instead they opened the gates to civil war. Antony, Caesar's loyal general, took up his banner. He stirred the crowds with fiery speeches. He swore to avenge his fallen leader. Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, a young man few had expected to rise, claimed his place too. He declared himself Caesar's true successor. Rome was split. The assassins fled. Antony and Octavian gathered armies. The Republic trembled once more. Cleopatra watches from Egypt. She weighed her choices. Should she ally herself with Antony? Should she approach Octavian? Or should she stand apart and let Rome destroy itself? She knew that Egypt could not remain untouched. Rome's shadow stretched across the sea. Sooner or later, its hand would reach for her again. She prepared her kingdom. She strengthened her fleets. She filled her coffers with grain and gold. She trained her son in the arts of kingship. And she waited for the moment when Egypt's fate would once more be bound to Rome. The weight of destiny. At night, Cleopatra walked the palace balconies. She looked out across the sea. She remembered her first meeting with Caesar, the moment she stepped from the carpet, the fire in his eyes, the power in his words. She felt his absence like a wound, but she also felt the weight of destiny. Her life was not meant to be quiet. Her reign was not meant to fade. She was still Pharaoh. She was still Isis incarnate. She was still the last queen of Egypt. And as the stars glittered above Alexandria, she knew another chapter of her story was coming. Another Roman general, another alliance of love and war, another chance to shape history. Cleopatra had returned home, but her journey was far from over. For the death of Caesar was not the end of her legend. It was the beginning of a new one.
The sea once again carried Roman sails. The year was 41 BCE, and destiny was about to bring Cleopatra face to face with another man who would change her life. Antony was no stranger to war. He was Caesar's loyal lieutenant, a man who had fought by his side for years, a soldier of immense courage, a commander of great skill. He was also larger than life, broad-shouldered, charismatic, known for his booming laughter, his love of wine, his appetite for pleasure. If Caesar was discipline and calculation, Antony was fire and passion. Rome both admired and feared him. After Caesar's death, Antony had taken his place as one of Rome's rulers. Alongside Octavian and Lepidus, he formed the Second Triumvirate. Together they hunted Caesar's assassins. Together they brought order back to the Republic. But their alliance was fragile. Octavian was cold, quiet, and cunning. Antony was bold, reckless, and proud. It was only a matter of time before their paths collided. As master of the eastern provinces, Antony called for Cleopatra. He demanded her presence in Tarsus, a city in Asia Minor. Some said it was to question her loyalty. Some said it was to secure Egypt's tribute. Others whispered it was curiosity. For Antony had heard of Cleopatra, the queen who had once enchanted Caesar, the queen who claimed to be Isis herself. Cleopatra could not refuse, but she would not go meekly. She would go in splendor. She would go in power. Cleopatra prepared a spectacle. She boarded a golden ship. Its sails were dyed purple, the color of royalty. Its oars were silver, shining in the sunlight. The deck was draped in silk. Musicians played harps and flutes.
Perfume drifted across the water, sweet and intoxicating. And upon a throne of gold, beneath a canopy of stars, sat Cleopatra. Dressed as the goddess Isis, crowned with jewels, her eyes glimmering with confidence. The people of Tarsus rushed to the harbor. They gasped at the sight. They whispered of divinity. They believed a goddess had come to earth. Antony waited in his hall, but the city spoke only of Cleopatra's arrival. And when he finally saw her, his heart was struck. Cleopatra walked into Antony's presence, not as a supplicant, but as an equal. Her voice was calm, her words were measured. She spoke of Egypt, of Rome, of alliance. Antony listened. He was charmed, not only by her beauty, but by her wit, by her power of presence. Here was no ordinary queen. Here was no frightened monarch. Here was a woman who could stand eye to eye with the generals of Rome. Antony was conquered, not by sword, but by spirit. Soon Antony and Cleopatra feasted together. They held banquets that dazzled the city. Tables groaned under roasted meats. Wine flowed like rivers. Musicians played deep into the night. Cleopatra matched Antony in every game. She drank as he drank. She laughed as he laughed. She matched his fire with her own brilliance. Stories tell of one banquet where she dissolved a pearl in vinegar, then drank it as wine. A display of wealth beyond imagination. A display to prove that Egypt's riches were boundless. Antony roared with laughter. He was captivated. He was enchanted. The bond between them grew quickly. It was not the quiet calculation of Caesar. It was passion. It was storm. It was fire. Cleopatra saw in Antony a partner of strength, a man who could protect her kingdom, a man who could share her throne. Antony saw in Cleopatra more than wealth, more than beauty. He saw freedom from Rome's cold politics. He saw life, laughter, and love. Together they became inseparable. Together they began to dream. But love in their world was never simple. Antony still had obligations in Rome. He was married. He was bound by politics. He was watched by Octavian, his rival and ally. To Rome, Cleopatra was once again dangerous, a foreign queen, a temptress, a threat to their republic. But Antony did not care. He sailed to Alexandria with her. He lived in her palace. He walked her gardens. He lay beneath her stars. The queen and the general, Cleopatra and Antony, had found each other, and the world began to tremble. With Antony at her side, Cleopatra ruled with renewed confidence. The city sparkled with festivals, the harbor filled with ships, the palace rang with music and celebration. Together they called themselves the inimitable livers. They feasted, they hunted, they celebrated the pleasures of life. But beneath the joy lay ambition. Cleopatra saw in Antony a chance to restore Egypt's glory. Antony saw in Cleopatra the wealth to fund his wars. Their love was passion, but it was also power.
Cleopatra had found her second Roman, not a cautious statesman like Caesar, but a fiery warrior like Antony. Together they would challenge the world. Together they would face Octavian. Together they would shape the destiny of Egypt and Rome. But passion can burn too bright, and fire, if left unchecked, can consume everything. Cleopatra had entered Antony's life in splendor. She had conquered his heart, and in doing so, she had set the stage for the final act of her story. The world watched, Rome whispered, and the Nile carried their names upon its waters. The queen and the general, Cleopatra and Antony, love and power bound together.
The city of Alexandria glittered like a jewel. It was more than a capital. It was the beating heart of Egypt. And under Cleopatra's reign, it reached its greatest glory. Sail into the harbor at dawn. The sun rises over the Mediterranean. Golden light spills across the water. Ships crowd the docks. Roman galleys with sharp prows. Merchant ships from Arabia, their holds filled with incense and spices. Caravans from India, their goods carried across deserts to the port. Grain ships heavy with wheat from the Nile, ready to feed the world. And towering above them all, the Pharaoh's lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the world. Its great fire blazed by night. By day, mirrors flashed the sunlight, a beacon seen for miles across the sea. Travelers stood in awe. No other city welcomed them like Alexandria. Step into the city. Streets paved with stone, colonnades of marble, shadows falling from tall buildings. Vendors shout their wares, fresh fish from the harbor, dates and figs from the Nile Valley, perfumes from Arabia, silks dyed purple from Phoenicia. Children play in the alleys, priests walk in procession, soldiers keep watch at every corner. The city is alive with languages: Greek, Egyptian, Latin, Aramaic. Merchants bargain, philosophers debate, sailors boast of their voyages. Alexandria is not only Egypt, it is the world in one city. At its heart stands the great library. Its halls rise with marble columns. Its rooms overflow with scrolls. Medicine, astronomy, mathematics, poetry, histories of faraway lands. Scholars from every nation gather here. They copy texts. They argue in shaded courtyards. They share discoveries. It is said the library holds hundreds of thousands of scrolls, the wisdom of centuries, the dreams of humanity written on papyrus. Cleopatra herself walks these halls. She speaks with the scholars. She sponsors their work. For she knows knowledge is power, and Alexandria is the center of learning. North of the city rises the palace, a complex of marble, gold, and gardens.
Terraces overlook the sea. Pools shimmer in the sun. Peacocks wander through shaded courtyards. Within its halls, Cleopatra rules. She sits upon a throne of ivory. Behind her, painted walls show the gods of Egypt. Isis with her wings, Horus with his falcon head, Osiris with his crown of the underworld. At her side, Mark Antony walks in Roman armor. Together they hold court. Together they dazzle the world. Alexandria celebrates like no other city. Festivals light the streets. Parades honor the gods. Musicians play. Dancers whirl in colorful silk. Incense drifts through the air. At the great banquet halls, tables bend under roasted lamb, fresh bread, and sweet honey cakes. Wine flows freely. Laughter fills the night. Cleopatra and Antony lead the revels. They are called the inimitable livers. They feast not only for pleasure, but to show the wealth of Egypt, to show that their rule is abundant, that their kingdom is rich beyond compare. For Cleopatra, Alexandria is more than a city. It is her symbol, her proof to Rome and the world. Here is Egypt's wealth. Here is Egypt's wisdom. Here is Egypt's splendor. When Rome whispers that Egypt is weak, Cleopatra points to Alexandria. When rivals claim her throne is fragile, she shows them her city, alive, glorious, unconquered. For Mark Antony, Alexandria is freedom. In Rome, he is bound by politics, by rivals, by suspicion. In Alexandria, he is a king. He walks through the gardens with Cleopatra. He hunts in the countryside. He dines beneath the stars. Here he feels alive. Here he feels loved. Here he feels powerful. But Rome watches. Octavian whispers against him. Senators mock him. They say Antony is bewitched. They say he has become the slave of an Eastern queen. And still Antony remains, for the splendor of Alexandria outshines the cold marble of Rome. At night, Alexandria glows. Torches line the streets. Lanterns float upon the harbor. The palace is lit with golden light. Music drifts through the air. The sounds of flutes. The laughter of revelers. The quiet prayers of priests in temples. Cleopatra walks her balcony. The city stretches before her. She feels its pulse. She feels its life. And she knows as long as Alexandria shines, Egypt still lives. But splendor is fragile. Even as the city gleams, shadows gather. Octavian in Rome sharpens his plans. Whispers of war drift across the sea. For now, Cleopatra and Antony revel in glory. For now, Alexandria stands as the jewel of the Mediterranean. But beyond the horizon, destiny moves closer, and the splendor of Alexandria may soon face its greatest trial. Alexandria glitters. Its harbor, its library, its palace, its queen. It is the city of wonders, and under Cleopatra, it is the dream of a nation. But dreams are fragile, and history is unforgiving.
The palace of Alexandria was filled with light. Music drifted through the air. Children's laughter echoed down the halls. Cleopatra was not only a queen now, she was a mother. And Antony was not only a Roman general, he was a father. Together, they ruled a family. And they ruled 2 worlds. Cleopatra and Antony had 3 children together. Twins, born in 40 BCE, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selina. 2 years later came another son, Ptolemy Philadelphus. Their names were symbols: Helios, the sun; Selene, the moon. They were not just children, they were omens, symbols of divine light and royal destiny. Cleopatra loved them fiercely. She taught them to speak many languages. She dressed them in gold and silk. She showed them the rituals of Egypt. She whispered the stories of the gods. To her people, they were the heirs of Isis and Osiris. To Rome, they were the heirs of Antony and Caesar's rival. The children were joy and danger both. Their very existence tied Rome and Egypt together. And that frightened many. But Antony's world was not only Egypt. He still belonged to Rome. He still shared power with Octavian. And Rome demanded his loyalty. In 40 BCE, Antony returned to the west. He met Octavian. They made peace. And to seal that peace, Antony married Octavian's sister, Octavia. It was politics, a gesture of unity, a show of alliance. But to Cleopatra, it was betrayal. The man who had sworn his love, the man who had promised her eternity, was now married to another. She said nothing. She did not rage. She did not send armies. She waited. She knew Antony would return. She knew the pull of Egypt, the pull of love, the pull of destiny. And she was right. Years passed. Antony grew restless in Rome. Octavian's ambitions suffocated him. The Senate whispered behind his back, and the cold marble of Rome felt lifeless after the warmth of Alexandria. So Antony sailed east once more. He returned to Cleopatra, and Egypt welcomed him like a god. Cleopatra met him at the harbor. She wore a crown of gold. Her eyes shone with triumph. The city erupted in celebration. For Egypt, Antony's return meant strength. It meant protection. It meant that Rome's greatest general had chosen their queen. In 34 BCE, Cleopatra and Antony held a grand ceremony. They sat on golden thrones before the people of Alexandria.
They called it the Donations of Alexandria. Antony declared Cleopatra Queen of Kings, ruler of Egypt, Cyprus, Libya, and Syria. He gave land and titles to their children. Alexander Helios, king of Armenia and Parthia. Cleopatra Selina, queen of Cyrene. Ptolemy Philadelphus, lord of the eastern provinces. The people cheered. Priests sang hymns. Incense filled the air. But across the sea, Rome seethed. Octavian heard the news. He was furious. He accused Antony of treason. He said Antony had given Roman lands to a foreign queen. He said Antony was bewitched, that Cleopatra had poisoned his mind, that he no longer served Rome but Egypt. Propaganda spread through the streets. Pamphlets mocked Antony. Poets wrote cruel verses. They called him the slave of a woman. They called Cleopatra the serpent of the Nile. Octavian's words struck deep. Rome's people turned cold. The Senate grew fearful, and the stage was set for war. In Alexandria, Cleopatra and Antony knew the storm was coming, but they refused to cower. They celebrated life. They lived each day as though it were eternal. They held banquets in the palace. They sailed the Nile together. They hunted lions in the desert. They raised their children. They laughed at the rumors. They defied the world. At night, Cleopatra would sit beside Antony on the balcony of the palace. Below them, the city glowed with thousands of lanterns. She would take his hand. She would whisper, "Rome does not understand us." And he would answer, "Then we will make them remember." They believed their love was stronger than politics, stronger than empires. But love alone cannot silence history. War was coming. Octavian gathered his armies. He raised fleets across the Mediterranean. He called it a war for Rome's honor. But everyone knew it was a war for power. Antony prepared his own fleet. Egypt's ships filled the harbors. Cleopatra supplied gold and grain. She stood beside Antony, not as consort, but as equal. Together, they would fight Octavian. Together, they would defend their love, their children, their kingdoms. But fate is cruel, and history, as always, has its price. Cleopatra looked upon her children and upon the man she loved, and she knew the world was closing in, but she would not run. She would not kneel. She would face the storm. The Queen of Kings, the mother of heirs, the last Pharaoh of Egypt. Her crown gleamed in the firelight, and in her eyes burned the courage of all the queens who came before her.
The sea grows restless again. The winds shift. The horizon darkens. War is coming. In the heart of Rome, Octavian moves like a shadow. He speaks softly in the Senate halls. He promises peace. He promises safety. And all the while, he whispers against Antony. Antony has betrayed Rome, he says. He kneels before the Queen of Egypt. He holds up the will of Antony, a copy stolen from the priests. He reads it aloud to the senators. It says Antony wishes to be buried in Alexandria, not in Rome. The senators gasp. The crowd murmurs. This is treason. This is betrayal. And in that moment, Octavian wins the city. The people turn to him. The legions rally to his cause. Rome belongs to Octavian, and Antony becomes the enemy. Across the sea, in Alexandria, Cleopatra knows what is coming. She can feel the storm approaching. Messengers bring word of Octavian's speeches, of his armies gathering, of his ships being built. But Cleopatra does not cower. She walks the palace halls with calm grace. She strengthens the fleet. She trains the soldiers. She fills the storehouses with grain. In her heart, she knows this fight is not only Antony's, it is Egypt's, it is hers. If Octavian wins, Egypt will fall. If Antony loses, her children will lose their future. So she stands ready, Queen of Kings, Pharaoh of the Nile, daughter of Isis. The lovers in the storm. Antony returns to her side. He has left Rome behind. He has burned his bridges. He belongs to Cleopatra now. They meet upon the palace balcony. The sea below them churns with the coming wind. Cleopatra takes his hand. Her voice is quiet. Will Rome forgive you? Antony shakes his head. His eyes are tired. No, Rome does not forgive love. For a long moment they say nothing. Only the sound of the sea. Only the sound of fate approaching. The fleet at Actium. The year is 31 BCE. The place, Actium, a narrow gulf on the western coast of Greece. There the two great powers of the world will meet, Antony and Cleopatra, rulers of the East, Octavian, ruler of the West. Antony commands his legions. Cleopatra commands her fleet. More than 200 ships, sails painted with gold and purple, banners snapping in the wind. The morning is bright, the water calm, but soon it will run red. The battle begins. Trumpets sound, oars strike the water, the fleets collide. Roman galleys slam into Egyptian ships. Flames erupt. Smoke fills the sky. The sea becomes a battlefield. Antony fights with fury. He shouts orders. He drives his men forward. But Octavian's general, Agrippa, is cunning, patient, relentless. The winds shift, the tides change, and slowly Antony's fleet begins to break. Cleopatra's choice. From her flagship, Cleopatra watches the chaos. The battle rages around her. Fire spreads across the waves. She sees Antony's ships falter. She sees Rome closing in. And she makes a choice. She orders her sails raised. She turns her ships to the open sea. She flees south toward Egypt. It is not cowardice, it is calculation. If the fleet is lost, Egypt can still survive. But Antony sees her sails retreating, and his heart shatters. Antony's pursuit. He cannot bear to see her go. He abandons the battle. He turns his ship. He follows her. Behind him his fleet burns. His soldiers die. His victory collapses. But in that moment, he cares for nothing. Not for Rome, not for glory, only for her. He reaches Cleopatra's ship. He climbs aboard. His face is pale with rage and heartbreak. "What have you done?" he cries. "You have destroyed us." But Cleopatra meets his gaze calmly. Better to live and fight again than to die in foreign waters. Her voice is soft, her eyes steady, and Antony cannot argue. He sinks to his knees. He knows the war is lost. The aftermath. The Battle of Actium ends in ruin. Octavian stands victorious. Antony's legions surrender. His allies flee. The once great general of Rome is now a fugitive. The Queen of Egypt is now a hunted monarch. They sail back to Alexandria in silence. The sea is calm once more, as if mocking them. The waves whisper softly against the hull. Each sound feels like farewell. Back in Alexandria, Cleopatra returns to her palace. She moves through its halls quietly. The laughter is gone. The music has faded. She stands by the balcony once more. The same balcony where she once dreamed of glory. Now she dreams of survival. Antony sits beside her, his armor tarnished, his pride wounded. He looks to the horizon and whispers, "Rome will come for us." And Cleopatra, with calm strength, replies, "Then let them come. Egypt will not bow." The queen's resolve. Though defeated, Cleopatra does not surrender. She rebuilds her city. She strengthens her defenses. She prepares for the inevitable. She knows Octavian will cross the sea. She knows his ambition. She knows his hunger. But she also knows herself. She is Cleopatra, the last pharaoh, the living Isis, and she will face him with dignity. The world has changed. Rome's republic is dying. An empire rises in its place, and Cleopatra, the last light of the ancient world, stands in its path. The sea is quiet once more, but the silence is heavy. It is the calm before the end.
The sea that once carried Cleopatra's glory is now quiet, but it is not peace. It is waiting. Waiting for Rome. Waiting for vengeance. Waiting for the end. The shadow of defeat. The news of Actium spreads quickly. Rome rejoices. Octavian is hailed as a hero. Antony
is condemned as a traitor. But in Alexandria, the queen still stands. Her palace gleams in the sun. Her soldiers remain loyal. Her people still whisper her name with love. But beneath the beauty, the air trembles with fear. They know Rome is coming. They know the legions will not stop until Egypt kneels. Antony walks the halls in silence. The laughter that once filled them is gone. He looks at the marble floors and sees the ghosts of banquets past. He had once been the lion of Rome. Now, he is a man haunted by memory. Cleopatra's strength. Cleopatra refuses to despair. She gathers her council. She calls her generals. She gives orders with calm precision. She sends envoys to distant kingdoms. She offers peace to Octavian. She offers tribute, wealth, and grain. But Octavian does not answer. He has already decided Egypt must fall, Cleopatra must die, and Rome must have its victory. Still, she prepares. She inspects the troops. She speaks to the people. She stands before the temples and prays to Isis for strength. She will not surrender her kingdom without a fight. The city under siege. The Roman ships arrive like thunder, hundreds of them, sails black with soot, their prows sharp as knives. The people of Alexandria watch from the walls. They see the horizon darken with Rome's fleet. They hear the distant drums. Octavian lands his army upon the shore. His banners flutter in the desert wind. The eagle of Rome gleams above the legions. Alexandria braces for war. Antony's last stand. Antony commands what forces remain. His army is smaller now, weary, but loyal. He rides among them, his armor dented and worn. He speaks not as a general, but as a man. He says, "Rome may have forgotten me, but I have not forgotten myself. We fight for honor. We fight for our queen. We fight for the Nile." The soldiers cheer. Their shouts echo through the streets, and for a moment, the old fire returns. The Battle of Alexandria. The clash begins at dawn. The desert wind blows dust across the field. The sound of steel fills the air. Roman legions march in perfect lines. Shields lock, spears thrust forward. Antony's men fight bravely. They strike hard. They shout Cleopatra's name. But the legions are endless, the discipline unbroken. By noon, the sun burns red. Bodies lie across the sand. The Nile runs dark. Cleopatra watches from the palace tower. She sees Antony's banners falter. She sees the smoke rise. Her heart tightens, but her face remains calm. She knows what must come next. The Palace Refuge. Cleopatra retreats into her mausoleum, a grand hall she had built years before. Marble walls, golden doors, a place meant for eternity. She fills it with her treasures: gold, jewels, scrolls, perfumes, artifacts of her reign. If the end must come, she will meet it among her riches, like a pharaoh of old. She sends a message to Antony, a desperate deception. She tells him she is dead. She knows what it will do to his heart. She knows he will come to her. When Antony hears the news, the world falls silent around him. He drops his sword. He looks toward the palace. "She is gone," he whispers. His voice breaks. The soldiers look away. Their general, their hero, their lion is defeated. He takes his blade. He falls upon it. But the wound is slow, painful, and even in dying, his heart calls for her. "Take me to her," he says. His servants carry him through the palace gates. They bring him to the mausoleum. The golden doors are closed, but Cleopatra is inside. Through a small window above, her attendants lower a rope. Antony is pulled upward, blood upon his armor, dust upon his face. And when he reaches her, Cleopatra takes him into her arms. The last embrace. For a moment, the world is still. Antony looks at her, her face framed by torchlight, her eyes glistening with tears. "Do not weep," he whispers. "Rome has taken all, but they cannot take this." Cleopatra holds him close. She feels his heartbeat fading. She kisses his forehead, and as the flame of the torches flickers, the last breath of Mark Antony leaves the world. Cleopatra is silent. Her tears fall quietly. She has lost her kingdom. She has lost her lover, but she will not lose her dignity. Outside, the city burns. The Roman legions march through the streets. Octavian's victory is complete. But in the palace, Cleopatra remains untouchable, not as prisoner, but as legend. The siege is over. The city is conquered. But the story of Egypt's last queen is not finished yet, for her final act will not be surrender. It will be immortality.
The palace is silent now. The torches burn low. The sound of the sea drifts faintly through the halls. Alexandria has fallen. The Romans march through its streets. The banners of Egypt are torn. The golden throne stands empty. But deep within the palace, Cleopatra still lives. The conqueror arrives. Octavian enters the city in triumph. He rides beneath an arch of victory. Crowds line the streets, some cheering, some weeping. The conqueror of Egypt, the heir of Caesar, the future Augustus. He demands to see the queen. He wants her alive. He wants to show her in chains before the people of Rome, a trophy, a warning. But Cleopatra refuses to be humiliated. She will not walk as a prisoner. She will not kneel before Rome. The last queen in chains. Octavian's guards find her in her mausoleum. She stands tall among her treasures. Gold glitters around her. Perfume fills the air. She bows her head politely, but her eyes are steady, unbroken. Rome has won, Octavian says. Submit, and your life will be spared. Cleopatra smiles faintly. Rome may have conquered my kingdom, she answers, but not my spirit. Her words unsettle him. He orders her kept under guard. No one is to approach her, no one to give her a blade, a poison, or any escape. But Cleopatra is clever, always has been. The plan of the queen. For days she remains calm. She dresses simply. She eats little. She speaks softly to her servants. But behind her calm eyes she plans. Every hour, every breath brings her closer to her final act. She writes a letter to Octavian. She asks permission to make one last offering to the gods of Egypt, to honor her ancestors, to say farewell to her throne. He allows it. He thinks she has accepted defeat. He does not yet understand her heart, the serpent gift. Cleopatra's attendants bring her a basket of figs. Hidden among them is a small serpent, an asp. Its scales glimmer like bronze, its eyes 2 drops of night. Cleopatra lifts the basket gently. She smiles. The queen has chosen her crown and her death. The final hours. She bathes in milk and oils. She dresses in royal linen. She places a golden diadem upon her head, the crown of Isis, the goddess she has embodied her whole life. Her servants, Charmian and Iris, stand beside her, weeping softly. Cleopatra turns to them. "Do not mourn me," she says, "for I go to join my love and my gods." She takes one last look at her palace, at the frescoes painted with lotus and papyrus, at the columns carved with the wings of Isis, at the sunlight spilling across the marble floor. Then she sits upon her golden couch, calm, composed, majestic. She reaches into the basket. The asp coils around her arm. Its tongue flickers. It strikes. The pain is brief. A whisper. A fading heartbeat. The death of a goddess. When Octavian's men arrive, they find her seated like a statue, her crown still on her brow, her robe of gold and white, her face serene. Charmian, still alive, adjusts the diadem. A soldier shouts, "Was this well done, woman?"
And Charmian, with her last breath, whispers, "It was fitting for one descended from kings." Then she too falls silent. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, is gone. The aftermath. Octavian stands before her body. For a moment, he says nothing. Even he, cold and calculating, is struck by her dignity. He has conquered her kingdom, but not her legend, not her will. He orders her buried with honor, beside Antony, the lovers, the rulers, the dreamers, together again beyond the reach of Rome. The end of a dynasty. With Cleopatra's death, the line of the pharaohs ends. 3,000 years of kings and queens, of temples and gods, of the Nile's eternal rhythm, all fades into history. Egypt becomes a province of Rome. The grain of the Nile feeds the empire. The treasures of Alexandria fill Roman halls. But something greater is lost. A world of mystery, a world of wonder, a world where gods walked among mortals. Cleopatra was its final flame, and as it went out, a new world began. Legacy of the Queen. Centuries would pass, empires would rise and fall, but her name would remain. Cleopatra, the woman who defied Rome, the queen who chose her own fate, the last pharaoh of Egypt. Poets would write of her beauty, historians of her wit, artists of her courage. Some would call her temptress, others would call her hero, but all would remember her, the eternal queen. In the quiet of her tomb, the queen rests beside her love. Outside, the Nile still flows. The stars still shine over Egypt, the same stars she once gazed upon from her palace balcony. And in their light, her story lives on. The story of a woman who ruled with mind and heart, who faced empires and defied fate, who became myth and never truly died. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh, the serpent and the crown.
The centuries have passed. The desert has reclaimed its secrets. The temples have crumbled. The palaces have turned to dust. But her name still echoes. Cleopatra. The queen of the Nile, the last pharaoh, the woman who defied Rome. A story that would not die. Empires rise, empires fall, but Cleopatra's story endures. In every age, she returns, in art, in song, in memory. Historians write her name with awe. Poets whisper it with wonder. Painters dream of her face. She is no longer only a queen. She is an idea, a symbol, a mystery that time cannot erase. The myths of her beauty. For centuries, stories of her beauty filled the world. Some said she could charm any man with a glance. Others said her voice alone could melt a heart. But those who knew her truth spoke differently. They said her power was not her face, but her mind, her intelligence, her wit, her courage. Cleopatra's true strength was not the shape of her lips or the color of her eyes, but the brilliance of her spirit. She was a master of languages, a ruler of nations, a strategist who played the game of empires and almost won. The Romans remember her. After her death, Rome could not forget her. They tried to turn her into a warning, a tale of ambition and seduction, of a queen who dared to challenge the empire. Octavian, now Augustus, used her story to justify his power. He told Rome that he had saved the world from her corruption. But even as he tried to erase her, her legend grew stronger. The people whispered, the poets wrote, the actors performed her story in theaters. And long after Augustus was gone, Cleopatra's name still glittered in the memory of Rome. The historians and the dreamers. In later centuries, historians sought to uncover her truth. They searched the ruins of Alexandria. They read the writings of Plutarch and Dio. They tried to separate myth from fact. But Cleopatra's life defied simplicity. She was a queen, a scholar, a mother, a lover, a symbol. To the Greeks, she was the last of their lineage. To the Egyptians, she was the living Isis. To the Romans, she was both fascination and fear. And to the world that came after, she became something timeless. Cleopatra in the ages of art. Painters of the Renaissance imagined her draped in silk, a golden asp coiled at her breast. Poets of the Enlightenment wrote of her courage, of her choice to die as a queen, not as a captive. In theaters and operas, her story became legend, a tale of passion and tragedy, of love greater than life. Shakespeare wrote of her. Artists sculpted her in marble. Musicians sang her name in symphonies. Each age reinvented her. Each age found something new in her eyes. A queen for all time. What is it about Cleopatra that endures through the centuries? Perhaps it is her defiance, her refusal to be controlled, her choice to die free. Perhaps it is her intelligence, her ability to lead men and nations in a world ruled by empires. Or perhaps it is the mystery, the way history cannot decide if she was hero or villain, saint or sinner, lover or conqueror. The truth is simple. She was all of them. The search for her tomb. Even today, archaeologists search for her resting place. Some believe it lies near Taposiris Magna, a temple west of Alexandria. Others say her body was lost when the city sunk beneath the sea. The sands hide their secrets well. But perhaps it is better this way. For as long as her tomb remains unseen, her story remains eternal. The mystery breathes. The legend lives. Cleopatra's true legacy. Cleopatra was the last light of the ancient world. After her came the Empire of Rome. The world changed forever. But her legacy endured. She proved that a woman could rule with intellect, that power could come from wisdom as much as force, that dignity could outlive defeat. She was not perfect. She was human. She made choices of love, of pride, of courage, and those choices made her immortal. Her life teaches that greatness is not in victory alone, but in how one faces the end. Cleopatra faced it as a queen, unbowed, unbroken, unforgettable. The eternal Queen of the Nile. Look to the stars above Egypt tonight. Somewhere, beyond time, beyond empires, her spirit still walks the banks of the Nile. The river that once reflected her crown still glows beneath the moonlight. The sands that once felt her footsteps still whisper her name. Cleopatra, Queen of Kings, daughter of Isis, the last Pharaoh of Egypt. Her reign has ended, but her story will never fade.
The story of Cleopatra did not end with her death. It began anew in the hearts of those who looked back across time and saw not only a queen, but a mirror of human ambition, courage, and grace. Lesson 1: Power and Vision. Cleopatra understood something few ever did: that true power is not in the sword, nor the throne, but in the mind that holds them. She ruled in an age of men, an age of generals and empires, and yet she held her own. She spoke 9 languages. She negotiated with Rome's greatest leaders. She restored Egypt's strength through intellect and diplomacy. Her vision was not only survival, it was legacy. She wanted Egypt to endure. And though her kingdom fell, her name endures still. That is power, not in conquest, but in remembrance. Lesson 2: The Art of Presence. Cleopatra had presence, a rare and subtle power. When she entered a room, the air seemed to change. When she spoke, people listened. It was not beauty alone that captured them. It was confidence. It was purpose. It was the knowledge that she was meant to be there. Presence cannot be faked. It comes from within, from knowing your worth, from standing in your truth. Cleopatra teaches this still, that true charm comes not from pleasing others, but from believing in yourself. Lesson 3: Love and Ambition. Cleopatra loved deeply. She loved Caesar. She loved Antony. But her love was never weakness. It was strategy and emotion intertwined.
She knew that love could shape history, that the heart could be a weapon, and affection a form of power. Yet love also brought her sorrow, for in giving her heart, she risked everything. From her we learn the dual edge of passion. It can lift us to greatness or lead us to ruin. But to live without it is not to live at all. Lesson 4. Dignity in defeat. No one escapes the fall. Not kings, not generals, not queens. But Cleopatra showed how to face loss with grace. When her empire crumbled, she did not plead. When Rome demanded her surrender, she chose her end with pride. She refused humiliation. She refused to be paraded in chains. She died as she lived, a queen to the last breath. From her we learned that dignity is eternal, that how we face the end defines who we truly are. Lesson 5. The legacy of knowledge. Cleopatra was not only ruler, but scholar. She surrounded herself with wisdom. She built libraries. She debated with philosophers. She sought truth in every scroll. Knowledge was her temple. Learning was her weapon. And though her scrolls burned, her spirit of inquiry survived. In every woman who studies, in every leader who listens, in every soul who seeks to understand before they judge. Lesson 6. Identity and strength. Cleopatra was born Greek, but she became Egyptian. She embraced her people's tongue, their gods, their faith. She became both, a bridge between worlds, a fusion of East and West. Her identity was her strength. She did not choose one side. She chose both. In a world that divided nations, she united them in her person. She reminds us even now that power lies not in purity, but in connection. Lesson 7. The courage to be remembered. Most rulers fade into dust. Their monuments crumble. Their names vanish from stone. But Cleopatra endures because she dared to be unforgettable. She understood that legacy is not built from wealth or war, but from story, from symbol, from the image you leave behind in the hearts of others. She crafted her image like an artist, a goddess, a scholar, a lover, a queen. She became myth by design, and through that myth, she conquered eternity. The Queen's reflection. If Cleopatra could speak to us now, what would she say? Perhaps she would smile softly and whisper, "Do not let the world tell your story. Write it yourself." She would tell us to love boldly, to lead wisely, to stand tall even in defeat, and to make our lives a work of art. Her story is not about tragedy. It is about resilience. It is about the human spirit, the fire that refuses to fade. The eternal lesson. In the end, Cleopatra's greatest victory was not over her enemies, but over time. Empires crumble, but her legend remains because she lived with purpose, she ruled with heart, and she died with grace. The world remembers her not as victim, but as vision. The woman who dared to be more than history allowed. The whisper of the Nile. So listen tonight to the whisper of the Nile, the same river that once carried her dreams, the same current that flows through ages. Hear its voice. It speaks softly still. Strength and wisdom endure. Love and courage remain. Be as I was, unbroken, unforgettable. And in that gentle whisper, Cleopatra lives again.
The stars hang low over Egypt tonight. The wind drifts softly from the desert, and the Nile moves, slow and endless, as it has since the dawn of time. Its waters remember everything: empires, kings, queens, dreams that rose like dawn and faded like dusk. Yet some stories never fade, some hearts never die, and in the rippling reflection of the moon, one name still whispers through eternity: Cleopatra. The eternal river. The Nile has always been Egypt's soul. It feeds the fields. It nourishes the people. It carries the memories of thousands of years. When the floods came, the people sang to it. When the droughts struck, they prayed beside it. It is the lifeblood of history, the witness of greatness. And tonight, it carries the spirit of the last pharaoh through its gentle waves. The city in silence. Alexandria sleeps beneath the stars. Its streets are quiet now. The music of banquets has faded. The shouts of soldiers are gone. Only the sea remains. The lighthouse no longer burns. The library lies in ruin. But the memory of its light still glows in the minds of dreamers. Once, this city was the heart of the world, and at its heart was her, the queen who turned history into legend. Echoes of the Queen. Sometimes, when the night is still and the desert wind moves through the reeds, one might imagine her voice, soft, assured, timeless, speaking to the river she loved, to the people she ruled, to the world that would remember her. I am still here, the whisper says, in every grain of sand, in every wave upon the Nile, in every story told beneath the stars. A kingdom beyond time. Cleopatra's kingdom did not end in stone. It lives in the imagination, in the endless retelling of her name. Artists paint her, writers dream of her, historians chase her shadow, and children still learn of her grace and courage. That is her true immortality. Not pyramids, not monuments, but memory. For what is a kingdom if not the love of those who remember it? Reflections under the stars. Stand upon the banks of the Nile and look at the sky. The stars above are the same that once shone upon her crown. The moonlight that touches the water tonight once touched her face. The wind that moves the palms once carried her perfume. History is not gone. It is only sleeping. It breathes in the night air. It lives in the heartbeat of the river. Lessons of the night. Every life, no matter how grand, is but a moment in time. But some moments
shine brighter than the rest. Cleopatra's life was such a flame, brilliant, fierce, and brief, yet its light still travels across centuries, across oceans, into the hearts of all who listen. She reminds us to live fully, to dream boldly, to stand tall, even when the world falls. The River's Lullaby. The night deepens. The waves move slowly. The Nile hums its ancient lullaby. It sings of harvests and gods, of kings and lovers, of all that is lost and all that endures. The sound is soft, soothing, endless, a song for a queen who once ruled the world by moonlight, a song for all who dream of legacy. The Final Vision. In the mind's eye, see her once more, standing upon her balcony, the wind in her hair, the city asleep below, the river gleaming beyond. She lifts her gaze to the heavens, she closes her eyes, she smiles, and in that moment the past and present meet, the mortal and divine become one. The queen becomes myth, the woman becomes eternal. The last words beneath the moon. Do not mourn me, her spirit whispers, for I am not gone. I am the river that flows forever, the star that burns above your night, the voice that speaks through time. The breeze moves through the reeds, the moonlight ripples across the water, and the Nile, eternal and unbroken, carries her name once more. Cleopatra, Pharaoh, goddess, woman, legend, forever. Epilogue. The Night over the Nile. The story ends where it began, beneath the stars, beside the water, in the hush of Egypt's night. The same night that watched her birth, the same moon that saw her reign, the same river that bore her memory home. So sleep now, traveler. Let the story drift through your dreams. Let the Nile sing you to rest, for the queen is at peace, and her legend still watches over the world.